Howdy, Turtleman here. You know, some of the first cowboys in all the United States came from right here in the Southeast, specifically Georgia and Florida. Florida was the first state to have the cow, brought over in 1521. Eventually, descendants of those Spanish cattle ranged northward into what is now Georgia. Colonists from South Carolina came down the late 1600s, early 1700s to bring these cattle back north. In fact, once Oglethorpe brought his people to the coast of Georgia, Ebenezer was one of the first settlements of note that had a large commerce of cattle trade. But right here in southwest Georgia, the confluence of the Muckalee and the Kinchafoonee Creek is where a man by the name of Jack Kennard lived. From the 1790s to the 1820s, Kennard ran thousands of head of cattle that he exported as far off as the West Indies, out of the ports of St. Mary's and St. Augustine during those years. Kennard was half Creek, half Scott, but all of the cattlemen here in South Georgia were known as rangers or cow hunters, many different names. But cow hunters because they had to go out into the woods to hunt up the cows. This is not like the ranges out west that were wide open. There were swamps and sloughs and bay heads that these people had to chase the cows through. They were a rough and tumbled breed, and we often refer to the people in general as crackers. This term goes back to Shakespeare. 1594 in his play King John, Shakespeare quotes, "What craker is this who deafs our ears with an abundance of superfluous breath?" It's basically saying, who in the world is this that won't hush up? They were braggarts, boasters, lively talkers, and storytellers. That's synonymous with about anybody you'd call a cracker today. But you can see behind me how this open pine land here, this is what a lot of South Georgia looked like. At one point in history, we had 90 million acres of longleaf pine timber here, open with wiregrass, perfect for foraging cattle. And during the wintertime, these cows would go deep into the creek bottoms and the swamps where river cane grew. That was their wintertime forage. But of course, anybody in South Georgia had to mark the cattle. Just like in the Old West out in Texas, there were cattle rustlers, people that were bent on changing brands and marks. Now, we often think of branding when it comes to marking and identifying cattle. The fire brand is the oldest technique used. You would simply have a design. This is AC. Whoever the owner of those cattle was would put his mark on them. But here in the Southeast, we use a different method. Occasionally, branding was used with this, but you would take a slick blade and you would mark the ear of that cow. And what you see right here are some of your basic marks. To start with, we have a split ear, just a simple slit right in the end of the cow's ear, or one like my family used, which is called a slick ear, which is where the tip of the ear is cropped clean off. A swallowtail bit, a swallowtail fork, a staple bit, like a fencing staple cut out of the ear, and you had an underbit and an overbit. There could be any combination of these to identify a landowner's cattle to him. And of course, how they'd communicate with the cattle was something like this. Communicate with the dogs that would hunt the cows up with other riders, but especially to keep the cattle milling and moving to get them to the pens. And this is what they called a drag, what most people would call a bull whip. This is commonly referred to as a cow whip. Some of these were up to 18 feet long, made of braided deerskin leather. But the reason they called them a drag is a whip did you no good rolled up. They were on their horse, they'd drag it over their shoulder. They'd ride through the wiregrass prairies, pop these whips, and keep the cattle moving to market. The great cattle drives in South Georgia sometimes lasted 2 or 3 weeks. Thanks y'all for tuning in. Y'all come back and see us later.